Final Encounter by Harry Harrison, first published April 1964 in Galaxy Magazine, republished 1965 in a collection of the author's short stories entitled Two Tales and Eight Tomorrows. Read by Daryl T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Final Encounter 1. Hautamaki had landed the ship on a rubble-covered pan of rock, a scored and ancient lava flow on the wrong side of the glacier. Tiond had thought, but only to herself, that they could have landed nearer, but Hautamaki was shipmaster and made all the decisions. Then again, she could have stayed with the ship. No one had forced her to join in this hideous scramble across the fissured ice, but of course staying behind was out of the question. There was a radio beacon of some kind over there, on this uninhabited planet, sending out squeals and cracklings on a dozen frequencies. She had to be there when they found it. Gulyas helped her over a difficult place, and she rewarded him with a quick kiss on his wind-burned cheek. It was too much to hope that it could be anything other than a human beacon, though their ship was supposed to be covering an unexplored area. Yet there was the slimmest chance that some others might have built the beacon. The thought of not being there at the time of a discovery like that was unbearable. How long had mankind been looking now? For how many time-dimmed centuries? She had to rest. She was not used to this kind of physical effort. She was roped between the two men, and when she stopped, they all stopped. Hautamaki halted and looked when he felt her hesitant tug on the rope, staring down at her and saying nothing. His body said it for him. Arrogant, tall, heavily muscled, bronzed, and nude under the transparent atmosphere suit. He was breathing lightly and normally, and his face never changed expression as he looked at her desperately heaving breast. Hautamaki! What kind of a man are you, Hautamaki, to ignore a woman with such a deadly glance? For Hautamaki, it had been the hardest thing he had ever done. When the two strangers had walked up the extended tongue of the ship's boarding ramp, he had felt violated. This was his ship, his and Kiiskinen's, but Kiiskinen was dead, and the child that they had wanted to have was dead. Dead before birth, before conception. Dead because Kiiskinen was gone, and Hautamaki would never want a child again. Yet there was still the job to be done. They had completed barely half of their survey swing when the accident had occurred. To return to survey base would have been prodigiously wasteful of fuel and time, so he had called for instructions, and this had been the result. A new survey team, unfledged and raw. They had been awaiting first assignment, which meant they at least had the training, if not the experience. Physically, they would do the work that needed to be done. There would be no worry about that, but they were a team. And he was only half a team, and loneliness can be a terrible thing. He would have welcomed them if Kiiskinen had been there. Now he loathed them. The man came first, extending his hand. "I'm Gulyas, as you know, and my wife, Tiond." He nodded over his shoulder and smiled, the hand still out. "Welcome aboard my ship," Hautamaki said, and clasped his own hands behind his back. If this fool didn't know about the social customs of men, he was not going to teach him. "Sorry, I forgot you don't shake hands or touch strangers." Still smiling, Gulyas moved aside to make room for his wife to enter the ship. "How do you do, shipmaster?" Tiond said. Then her eyes widened and she flushed, as she saw for the first time that he was completely nude. "I'll show you your quarters," Hautamaki said, turning and walking away, knowing they would follow. A woman. He had seen them before on various planets, even talked with them, but never had he believed that there would someday be one on his ship. How ugly they were, with their swollen bodies. It was no wonder that on the other worlds everyone wore clothes to conceal those blubbery, bobbing things and the excess fat below. Why, he wasn't even wearing shoes, Tiond said indignantly as she closed the door. Goliath laughed. Since when has nudity bothered you? You didn't even seem to mind it during our holiday on He, and you knew about the men's customs. But that was different. Everyone was dressed, or undressed, the same. But this, it's almost indecent. One man's indecency is another's decency. I bet you can't say that 3 times fast. Nevertheless, it's true. When you come down to it, he probably thinks we're just as socially wrong as you seem to think he is. I don't think, I know, she said, reaching up on tiptoes to nip his ear with her tiny teeth, as white and perfectly shaped as rice grains. How long have we been married? 6 days, 19 hours standard, and some odd minutes. Only odd because you haven't kissed me in such a terribly long time. He smiled down at her tiny, lovely figure, ran his hand over the warm firmness of her hairless skull and down her straight body, brushing the upturned, almost vestigial buds of her breasts. You're beautiful, he said, then kissed her. 2. Once they were across the glacier, the going was easier on the hard-packed snow. Within an hour they had reached the base of the rocky spire. It stretched above them against the green-tinted sky, black and fissured. Tiond let her eyes travel up its length and wanted to cry. It's too tall, impossible to climb. With the grav sled we could ride up. We've discussed this before, Haudamaki said, looking at Goliath as he always did when he talked to her. I will bring no radiation sources near the device up there until we determine what it is. Nothing can be learned from our aerial photograph except that it appears to be an untended machine of some kind. I will climb first. You may follow. It is not difficult on this type of rock. It was not difficult. It was downright impossible. She scrambled and fell and couldn't get a body's length up the spire. In the end, she untied her rope. As soon as the 2 men had climbed above her, she sobbed hopelessly into her hands. Goliath must have heard her, or he knew how she felt being left out, because he called back down to her. I'll drop you a rope as soon as we get to the top, with a loop on the end. Slip your arms through it, and I'll pull you up. She was sure that he wouldn't be able to do it, but still she had to try. The beacon. It might not be human-made. The rope cut into her body, and surprisingly enough, he could pull her up. She did her best to keep from banging into the cliff and twisting about. Then Goliath was reaching down to help her. Haudamaki was holding the rope, and she knew that it was the strength of those corded arms, not her husband's, that had brought her up so quickly. Haudamaki, thank you for... We will examine the device now, he said, interrupting her and looking at Goliath while he spoke. You will both stay here with my pack. Do not approach unless you are ordered to. He turned on his heel and with purposeful stride went to the outcropping where the machine stood. No more than a pace away from it, he dropped to one knee, his body hiding most of it from sight, staying during long minutes in this cramped position. What is he doing? Tiond whispered, hugging tight to Goliath's arm. What is it? What does he see? Come over here, Haudamaki said, standing. There was a ring of emotion in his voice that they had never heard before. They ran, skidding on the ice-glazed rock, stopping only at the barrier of the outstretched arm. What do you make of it? Haudamaki asked, never taking his eyes from the squat machine fixed to the rock before them. There was a central structure, a half-sphere of yellowish metal that clamped tight to the rock, its bottom edge conforming to the irregularities beneath it. From this projected stubby arms of the same material arranged around the circumference close to the base. On each arm was a shorter length of metal. Each one was shaped differently, but all were pointing skywards like questing fingers. An arm-thick cable emerged from the side of the hemisphere and crawled over to a higher shelf of rock. There it suddenly straightened and stood straight up, rearing into the air above their heads. Goliath pointed to this. I have no idea what the other parts do, but I'll wager that is the antenna that has been sending out these signals we picked up when we entered this system. It might be, Haudamaki admitted, but what about the rest? One of those things that's pointing up towards the sky looks like a little telescope, Tiond said. I really believe it is. Haudamaki gave an angry cry and reached for her as she knelt on the ground, but he was too late. She pressed one eye to the bottom of the tube, squinted the other shut, and tried to see. Why, yes, it is a telescope. She opened the other eye and examined the sky. I can see the edge of the clouds up there very clearly. Goliath pulled her away, but there was no danger. It was a telescope, as she had said, nothing more. They took turns looking through it. It was Haudamaki who noticed that it was slowly moving. In that case, all of the others must be turning too, since they're parallel, Goliath said, pointing to the metal devices that tipped each arm. One of them had an eyepiece, not unlike the telescopes, but when he looked into it, there was only darkness. I can't see a thing through it, he said. Perhaps you weren't intended to, Haudamaki said, rubbing his jaw while he stared at the strange machine, then turned away to rummage in his pack. He took a multi-radiation tester from its padded carrying case and held it before the eyepiece that Goliath had been trying to look through. Infrared radiation only. Everything else is screened out. Another of the tube-like things appeared to focus ultraviolet rays, while an open latticework of metal plates concentrated radio waves. It was Tiond who voiced the thought they all had. If I looked through a telescope, perhaps all these other things are telescopes too, only made for alien eyes, as if the creatures who built the thing didn't know who or what would be coming here and provided all kinds of telescopes working on all kinds of wavelengths. The search is over. We, mankind, we're not alone in the universe after all. We mustn't leap to conclusions, Haudamaki said, but the tone of his voice belied his words. Why not? Goliath shouted, hugging his wife to him in a spasm of emotion. Why shouldn't we be the ones to find the aliens? If they exist at all, we knew we would come across them sometime. The galaxy is immense, but finite. Look, and you shall find. Isn't that what it says over the entrance to the academy? We have no real evidence yet, Haudamaki said, trying not to let his own growing enthusiasm show. He was the leader. He must be the devil's advocate. This device could have been human-made. Point 1, Goliath said, ticking off on his finger. It resembles nothing that any of us have ever seen before. Secondly, it is made of a tough, unknown alloy. And thirdly, it is in a section of space that, as far as we know, has never been visited before. We are light centuries from the nearest inhabited system, and ships that can make this sort of trip and return are only a relatively recent development. And here is real evidence, without any guesswork, Tiond shouted, and they ran over to her. She had followed the heavy cable that transformed itself into the aerial. At the base, where it was thickened and fastened to the rock, were a series of incised characters. There must have been hundreds of them, rising from ground level to above their heads, each one clear and distinct. Those aren't human. Tiand said triumphantly. They do not bear the slightest resemblance to any written characters of any language known to man. They are new. How can you be so sure? Hautomaki said, forgetting himself enough to address her directly. I know, shipmaster, because this is my specialty. I trained in comparative philology and specialized in abichiology, the study of the history of alphabets. We are probably the only science that is in touch with the Earth. Impossible! No, just very slow. Earth must be halfway around the galaxy from where we are now. If I remember correctly, it takes about 400 years for a round-trip communication. Abichiology is a study that can only grow at the outer fringes. We deal with a hard core of unalterable fact. The old Earth alphabets are part of history and cannot be changed. I've studied them all, every character and every detail, and I have observed their mutations through the millennia. It can be observed that no matter how alphabets are modified and changed, they will retain elements of their progenitors. That is the letter L as it has been adapted for computer input. She scratched it into the rock with the tip of her knife, then incised a wavy character next to it. And this is the Hebrew Lamet, in which you can see the same basic shape. Hebrew is a proto-alphabet so ancient as to be almost unbelievable, yet there is the same right-angle bend. But these characters, there is nothing there that I've ever seen before. The silence stretched on while Hautomaki looked at her, studied her as if the truth or falsity of her words might be written somehow on her face. Then he smiled. I'll take your word for it. I'm sure you know your field very well. He walked back to his pack and began taking out more test instruments. Did you see that? Tiond whispered in her husband's ear. He smiled at me. Nonsense. It is probably the first rictus of advanced frostbite. Hautomaki had hung a weight from the barrel of the telescope and was timing its motion over the ground. Gulyas, he asked, do you remember this planet's period of rotation? Roughly 18 standard hours. The computation wasn't exact. Why? Well, that's close enough. We're at about 85 degrees north latitude here, which conforms to the angle of those rigid arms, while the motion of these scopes counteracts the planet's rotation, moving at the same speed in the opposite direction. Of course, I should have seen it. What are you two talking about? Tiond asked. They point to the same spot in the sky all the time, Gulyas said. To a star. It could be another planet in this system, Hautomaki said, then shook his head. No, there's no reason for that. It is something outside. We will tell after dark. They were comfortable in their atmosphere suits and had enough food and water. The machine was photographed and studied from every angle, and they theorized on its possible power source. In spite of this, the hours dragged by until dusk. There were some clouds, but they cleared away before sunset. When the first star appeared in the darkening sky, Hautomaki bent to the ocular of the telescope. Just sky, too light yet, but there is some sort of glowing grid appearing in the field, 5 thin lines radiating in from the circumference. Instead of crossing, they fade as they come to the center. But they'll point out whatever star is in the center of the field, without obscuring it? Yes, the stars are appearing now. It was a 7th magnitude star, isolated near the galactic rim. It appeared commonplace in every way except for its location, with no nearby neighbors, even in stellar terms. They took turns looking at it, marking it so they could not possibly mistake it for any other. Are we going there? Tiond asked, though it was more of a statement than a question that sought an answer. Of course, Hautomaki said. 3. As soon as their ship had cleared atmosphere, Hautamaki sent a message to the nearest relay station. While they waited for an answer, they analyzed the material they had. With each result, their enthusiasm grew. The metal was no harder than some of the resistant alloys they used, but its composition was completely different, and some unknown process of fabrication had been used that had compacted the surface molecules to a greater density. The characters bore no resemblance to any human alphabet, and the star towards which the instruments had been pointed was far beyond the limits of galactic exploration. When the message arrived, signal recorded, they jumped the ship at once on the carefully computed and waiting course. Their standing instructions were to investigate anything, report everything, and this they were doing. With their planned movements recorded, they were free. They were going to make a first contact with an alien race, had already made contact with one of its artifacts. No matter what happened now, the honor was irrevocably theirs. The next meal turned naturally into a celebration, and Hautamaki unbent enough to allow other intoxicants as well as wine. The results were almost disastrous. "A toast!" Tiond shouted, standing and wobbling just a bit. "To Earth and mankind, no longer alone!" "No longer alone," they repeated, and Hautamaki's face lost some of the party gaiety that it had reluctantly gained. "I ask you to join me in a toast," he said, "to someone you never knew who should have been here to share this with us." "To Kiiskinen," Gulyas said. He had read the records and knew about the tragedy that was still fresh in Hautamaki's thoughts. "Thank you. To Kiiskinen." They drank. "I wish we could have met him," Tiond said, a tendril of feminine curiosity tickling at her. "A fine man," Hautamaki said, seeming anxious to talk, now that the subject had been broached for the first time since the accident. "One of the very finest. We were 12 years on this ship." "Did you have children?" Tiond asked. "Your curiosity is not fitting," Gulyas snapped at his wife. "I think it would be better if we dropped—" Hautamaki held up his hand. "Please, I understand your natural interest. We men have settled only a dozen or so planets, and I imagine our customs are curious to you. We are only in a minority as yet, but if there is any embarrassment, it is all your own. Are you embarrassed about being bisexual? Would you kiss your wife in public?" "A pleasure," Gulyas said, and did. "Then you understand what I mean. We feel the same way and at times act the same way, though our society is monosexual. It was a natural result of ectogenesis." "Not natural," Tiond said, a touch of color in her cheeks. "Ectogenesis needs a fertile ovum. Ova come from females. An ectogenetic society should logically be a female society. An all-male one is unnatural." "Everything we do is unnatural," Hautamaki told her without apparent anger. "Man is an environment-changing animal. Every person living away from Earth is living in an unnatural environment. Ectogenesis on these terms is no more unnatural than living, as we are now, in a metal hole, in an unreal manifestation of space-time. That this ectogenesis should combine the germ plasm from 2 male cells rather than from an egg and a sperm is of no more relevancy than your vestigial breasts." "You are being insulting," she said, blushing. "Not in the least. They have lost their function, therefore they are degenerative. You bisexuals are just as natural or unnatural as we men. Neither is viable without the unnatural environment that we have created." The excitement of their recent discovery still possessed them, and perhaps the stimulants and the anger had lowered Tiond's control. "Why, how dare you call me unnatural? You forget yourself, woman," Hautamaki boomed, drowning out the word, leaping to his feet. You expected to pry into the ultimate details of my life and are insulted when I mention some of your own taboos. The men are better off without your kind. He drew a deep, shuddering breath, turned on his heel, and left the room. Tiond stayed in their quarters for almost a standard week after that evening. She worked on her analysis of the alien characters, and Gulyas brought her meals. Hautamaki did not mention the events and cut Gulyas off when he tried to apologize for his wife, but he made no protest when she appeared again in the control section, though he reverted to his earlier custom of speaking only to Gulyas, never addressing her directly. "Did he actually want me to come too?" Tiond asked, closing her tweezers on a single tiny hair that marred the ivory sweep of her smooth forehead and skull. She pulled it out and touched her brow. "Have you noticed that he really has eyebrows? Right here. Great shabby things like an atavism. Even hair around the base of his skull. Disgusting. I'll bet you that the men sort their genes for hirsuteness. It couldn't be accident. You never answered. Did he ask for me to be there?" "You never gave me a chance to answer," Gulyas told her, a smile softening his words. "He didn't ask for you by name. That would be expecting too much. But he did say that there would be a full crew meeting at 19 hours. She put a touch of pink makeup on the lobes of her ears and the bottoms of her nostrils, then snapped her cosmetic case shut. "I'm ready whenever you are. Shall we go see what the shipmaster wants?" "In 20 hours, we'll be breaking out of jump space," Hautamaki told them when they had met in the control section. "There's a very good chance that we will encounter the people, the aliens, who constructed the beacon. Until we discover differently, we will assume that they are peacefully inclined. Yes, Gulyas?" "Shipmaster, there has been a good deal of controversy on the intentions of any hypothetical race that might be encountered. There has been no real agreement." "It does not matter. I am shipmaster. The evidence so far indicates a race looking for contact, not conquest. I see it this way. We have a rich and very old culture, so while we have been searching for another intelligent life form, we have also been exploring and recording with ships like this one. A poorer culture might be limited in the number of ships that they could apply to this kind of occupation. Therefore, the beacons. Many of them could be easily planted by a single ship over a large area of space. There are undoubtedly others. All of them serve to draw attention to a single star, a rendezvous point of some type. This doesn't prove peaceful intentions. It could be a trap." "I doubt it. There are far better ways to satisfy warlike tendencies than to set elaborate traps like this. I think their intentions are peaceful, and that is the only factor that matters. Until we actually encounter them, any action will have to be based on a guess. Therefore, I have already jettisoned the ship's armament." "You what?" "And I'll ask you to surrender any personal weapons that you might have in your possession." "You're risking our lives without even consulting us," Tiond said angrily. "Not at all," he answered, not looking at her. "You risked your own life when you entered the service and took the oath. You will obey my instructions. All weapons here within the hour. I want the ship clean before we break through. We will meet the strangers armed only with our humanity. You may think the men go naked for some perverse reason, but that is wrong. We have discarded clothes as detrimental to total involvement in our environment, a both practical and symbolic action." "You aren't suggesting that we remove our clothes as well, are you?" Tiond asked, still angry. "Not at all. Do as you please. I'm just attempting to explain my reasons so we will have some unanimity of action when we encounter the intelligent creatures who built the beacon. Survey knows now where we are. If we do not return, a later contact team will be protected by mankind's complete armory of death. So we will now give our aliens every opportunity to kill us, if that is what they are planning. Retribution will follow. If they do not have warlike intentions, we will make peaceful contact. That in itself is reason enough to risk one's life 100 times over. I don't have to explain to you the monumental importance of such a contact. The tension grew as the time for breakthrough approached. The box of handguns, explosive charges, poisons from the laboratory, even the large knives from the kitchen, had long since been jettisoned. They were all in the control area when the bell pinged softly, and they broke through back into normal space. Here, at the galactic rim, most of the stars were massed to one side. Ahead lay a pit of blackness with a single star glowing. "That's it," Goliath said, swinging back the spectral analyzer. "But we're not close enough for clear observation. Are we going to take another jump now?" "No," Haudamaki said. "I want a Clev's observation first." The sensitive Clev's screen began to glow as soon as the pressure dropped, darkening slowly. There were occasional bursts of light from their surface as random molecules of air struck them. Then this died away. The forward screen deepened to the blackness of outer space, and in its center appeared the image of the star. "It's impossible," Tiond gasped from the observer's seat behind them. "Not impossible," Haudamaki said, "just impossible of natural origin. Its existence proves what we see can and has been constructed. We will proceed." The star image burned with unreality. The star itself at the core was normal enough, but how to explain the 3 interlocking rings that circled it? They had the dimensions of a planetary orbit. Even if they were as tenuous as a comet's tail, their construction was an incredible achievement. And what could be the significance of the colored lights on the rings, apparently orbiting the primary like insane electrons? The screen sparkled, and the image faded. "It could only be a beacon," Haudamaki said, removing his helmet. "It is there to draw attention, as was the radio beacon that drew us to the last planet. What race with the curiosity to build spaceships could possibly resist the attraction of a thing like that?" Goliath was feeding the course corrections into the computer. "It is still baffling," he said. "With the physical ability to construct that, why haven't they built an exploring fleet to go out and make contacts instead of trying to draw them in?" "I hope that we will discover that answer soon, though it probably lies in whatever composes their alien psychology. To their way of thinking, this might be the obvious manner, and you will have to admit that it has worked." 4. This time, when they made the transition from jump space, the glowing rings of light filled the front ports. Their radio receivers were on, automatically searching the wavelengths. They burst into sound on a number of bands simultaneously. Goliath lowered the volume. "This is the same kind of broadcast we had from the beacon," he said. "Very directional. All of the transmissions are coming from that golden planetoid, or whatever it is. It's big, but doesn't seem to have a planetary diameter." "We're on our way," Haudamaki told him. "I'll take the controls. See if you can get any image on the video circuits." "Just interference, but I'm sending out a signal, a view of this cabin. If they have the right equipment, they should be able to analyze our signal and match it. Look, the screen is changing. They're working fast." The view screen was rippling with color. Then a picture appeared, blurred, then steadied. Tiond focused, and it snapped into clear life. The 2 men looked, stared. Behind them, Tiond gasped. "At least no snakes or insects. Praise fortune for that." The being on the screen was staring at them with the same intensity. There was no way to estimate its relative size, but it was surely humanoid. 3 long fingers, heavily webbed, with an opposed thumb. Only the upper part of its figure was visible, and this was clothed, so that no physical details could be seen. But the being's face stood out clearly on the screen, golden in color, hairless, with large, almost circular eyes. Its nose, had it been a human one, would be said to be broken, spread over its face, nostrils flaring. This and the cleft upper lip gave it a grim appearance to human eyes. But this yardstick could not be applied. By alien standards, it might be beautiful. Sabib Tahib, the creature said. The radio beacons carried the matching audio now. The voice was high-pitched and squeaky. I greet you as well, Hautamaki said. We both have spoken languages, and we will learn to understand each other, but we come in peace. Maybe we do, but I can't say the same thing for these aliens, Golyas interrupted. Look at screen 3. This held an enlarged view taken from one of the forward pickups, locked onto the planetoid they were approaching. A group of dark buildings stood out from the golden surface, crowned with a forest of aerials and antennas. Ringed about the building were circular structures mounted with squat tubular devices that resembled heavy-bore weapons. The similarity was increased by the fact that the numerous emplacements had rotated. The open orifices were tracking the approaching ship. I'm killing our approach velocity, Hautamaki said, stabbing the control buttons in rapid sequence. Set up a repeater plate here and switch on a magnified view of those weapons. We'll find out their intentions right now. Once their motion relative to the golden planetoid had been stopped, Hautamaki turned and pointed to the repeater screen, slowly tapping the image of the weapons. Then he tapped himself on the chest and raised his hands before him, fingers spread wide, empty. The alien had watched this dumb show with glistening golden eyes. It rocked its head from side to side and repeated Hautamaki's gesture, tapping itself on the chest with its long central finger, then pointed into the screen. He understood at once, Golyas said. Those weapons, they're turning away, sinking out of sight. We'll continue our approach. Are you recording this? Sight, sound, full readings from every instrument. We've been recording since we first saw the star, with the tapes being fed into the armored vault as you ordered. I wonder what the next step is. They've already taken it. Look. The image of the alien reached off the screen and brought back what appeared to be a metal sphere that it held lightly in one hand. From the sphere projected a pipe-like extrusion of metal with a lever halfway up its length. When the alien pressed the lever, they heard a hissing. A tank of gas, Golyas said. I wonder what it is supposed to signify. No, it's not gas. It must be a vacuum. See, the pipe is sucking up those grains sprinkled on the table. The alien kept the lever depressed until the hissing stopped. Ingenious, Hautamaki said. Now we know there is a sample of their atmosphere inside that tank. There was no mechanical propulsion visible, but the sphere came swooping up towards their ship where it swung in orbit above the golden planetoid. The sphere stopped just outside the ship and clearly visible from the viewports, bobbing in a small arc. Some sort of force beam, Hautamaki said. Though nothing registers on the whole instruments, that's one thing I hope we find out how to do. I'm going to open the outer door on the main hatch. As soon as the door opened, the sphere swooped and vanished from sight, and they saw, through the pickup inside the airlock, that it fell gently to the deck inside. Hautamaki closed the door and pointed to Golyas. Take a pair of insulated gloves and carry that tank to the lab. Run the contents through the usual air examination procedures that we use for testing planetary atmosphere. As soon as you have taken the sample, evacuate the tank and fill it with our own air, then throw it out through the lock. The analyzers worked on the sample of alien air, and presumably the aliens were doing the same with their tank of ship's atmosphere. The analysis was routine and fast, the report appearing in coded form on the panel in control. "Unbreathable," Golyas said. "At least for us, there seems to be enough oxygen, more than enough, but any of those sulfurated compounds would eat holes through our lungs. They must have rugged metabolisms to inhale stuff like that. One thing for certain, we'll never be in competition for the same worlds." "Look, the picture is changing," Tiond said, drawing their attention back to the viewing screen. The alien had vanished, and the viewpoint appeared to be in space above the planetoid's surface. A transparent bulge on its surface filled the screen, and while they watched, the alien entered it from below. The scene shifted again, and they were looking at the alien from inside the clear-walled chamber. The alien came towards the pickup, but before reaching it, the alien stopped and leaned against what appeared to be thin air. "There's a transparent wall that divided the dome in half," Golyas said. "I'm beginning to get the idea." The pickup panned away from the alien, swept around to the opposite direction where there was an entrance cut into the clear fabric of the wall. The door was open into space. "That's obvious enough," Hautomaki said, rising to his feet. "That central wall must be airtight so it can be used for a conference chamber. I'll go. Keep a record of everything." "It looks like a trap," Tiond said, fidgeting with her fingers while she looked at the invitingly open door on the screen. "It will be a risk." Hautomaki laughed, the first time they had ever heard him do it, as he climbed into his pressure suit. "A trap? Do you believe they've gone to all this to set up a trap for me? Such ego is preposterous. And if it were a trap, do you think it possible to stay out of it?" He pushed himself free of the ship. His suited figure floated away, getting smaller and smaller. Silently, moving closer together without realizing they did so, they watched the meeting on the screen. They saw Hautomaki drawn gently in through the open doorway until his feet touched the floor. He turned to look as the door closed, while from the radio they heard a hissing, very dimly at first, then louder and louder. "It sounds like they're pressurizing the room," Golyas said. Hautomaki nodded. "Yes, I can hear it now, and there is a reading on the external pressure gauge. As soon as it reaches atmospheric normal, I'm taking my helmet off." Tiond started to protest, but stopped when her husband raised his hand in warning. This was Hautomaki's decision to make. "Smells perfectly breathable," Hautomaki said, "though it has a metallic odor." He laid his helmet aside and stripped his suit off. The alien was standing at the partition, and Hautomaki walked over until they stood face to face, almost the same height. The alien placed his palm flat against the transparent wall, and the human put his hand over the same spot. They met as close as they could, separated only by a centimeter of substance. Their eyes joined, and they stared for a long time, trying to read intent, trying to communicate. The alien turned away first, walking over to a table littered with a variety of objects. It picked up the nearest one and held it for Hautomaki to see. "Kilt," the alien said. It looked like a piece of stone. Hautomaki for the first time took notice of the table on his side of the partition. It appeared to hold the identical objects as the other table, and the first of these was a lump of ordinary stone. He picked it up. "Stone," he said, then turned to the television pickup and the unseen viewers in the ship. It appears that a language lesson is first. This is obvious. See that this is recorded separately. Then we can program the computer for machine translation in case the aliens aren't doing it themselves. The language lesson progressed slowly once the stock of the simple nouns with physical reference had been exhausted. Films were shown, obviously prepared long before, showing simple actions, and bit by bit verbs and tense were exchanged. The alien made no attempt to learn their language. He just worked to ensure accuracy of identity in the words. They were recording too. As the language lesson progressed, Gulyas's frown deepened, and he started to make notes, then a list that he checked off. Finally, he interrupted the lesson. Hautamaki, this is important. Find out if they are just accumulating a vocabulary or if they are feeding a MT with this material. The answer came from the alien itself. It turned its head sideways, as if listening to a distant voice, then spoke into a cup-like device at the end of a wire. A moment later, Hautamaki's voice spoke out, toneless, since each word had been recorded separately. I talk through a machine. I talk my talk. A machine talk your talk to you. I am Liam. We need have more words in machine before talk well. This can't wait, Gulyas said. Tell them that we want a sample of some of their body cells, any cells at all. It is complex, but try to get it across. The aliens were agreeable. They did not insist on a specimen in return, but accepted one. A sealed container brought a frozen sliver of what looked like muscle tissue over to the ship. Gulyas started towards the lab. Take care of the recordings, he told his wife. I don't think this will take long. 5. It didn't. Within the hour he had returned, coming up so silently that Tjond, intent on listening to the language lesson, did not notice him until he stood next to her. Your face, she said. What is wrong? What did you discover? He smiled dryly at her. Nothing terrible, I assure you, but things are very different from what we supposed. What is it? Hautamaki asked from the screen. He had heard their voices and turned towards the pickup. How has the language progressed? Gulyas asked. Can you understand me, Liam? Yes, the alien said. Almost all of the words are clear now, but the machine has only a working force of a few thousand words, so you must keep your speech simple. I understand. The things I want to say are very simple. First, a question. Your people, do they come from a planet orbiting about a star near here? No. We have traveled a long way to this star, searching. My homeworld is there, among those stars, there. Do all your people live on that world? No. We live on many worlds, but we are all children of children of children of people who lived on one world very long ago. Our people have also settled many worlds, but we all come from one world, Gulyas told him, then looked down at the paper in his hands. He smiled at the alien in the screen before him, but there was something terribly sad about this smile. We came originally from a planet named Earth. That is where your people came from, too. We are brothers, Liam. What madness is this? Hautamaki shouted at him, his face swollen and angry. Liam is humanoid, not human. It cannot breathe our air. He cannot breathe our air, or perhaps she, Goyas answered quietly. We do not use gene manipulation, but we know that it is possible. I'm sure we will eventually discover just how Liam's people were altered to live under the physical conditions they do now. It might have been natural selection and normal mutation, but it seems too drastic a change to be explained that way. But that is not important. This is... He held up the sheets of notes and photographs. You can see for yourself, this is the DNR chain from the nucleus of one of my own cells. This is Liam's. They are identical. His people are as human as we are. They can't be. Tion shook her head in bewilderment. Just look at him. He is so different. And their alphabet? What about that? I cannot be wrong about that. There is one possibility you did not allow for, a totally independent alphabet. You yourself told me that there is not the slightest similarity between the Chinese ideographs and Western letters. If Liam's people suffered a cultural disaster that forced them to completely reinvent writing, you would have your alien alphabet. As to the way they look, just consider the thousands of centuries that have passed since mankind left Earth, and you will see that his physical differences are minor. Some are natural and some may have been artificially achieved, but germ plasm cannot lie. We are all the sons of man. It is possible, Liam said, speaking for the first time. I am informed that our biologists agree with you. Our points of difference are minor when compared to the points of similarity. Where is this Earth you come from? Hautamaki pointed at the sky above them, at the star-filled sweep of the Milky Way burning with massed stars. There, far out there on the other side of the core, roughly halfway around the lens of the galaxy. The core explains partially what must have happened, Goyas said. It is thousands of light years in diameter and over 10,000 degrees in temperature. We have explored its fringes. No ship could penetrate it or even approach too closely because of the dust clouds that surround it. So we have expanded outwards, slowly circling the rim of the galaxy, moving away from Earth. If we stopped to think about it, we should have realized that mankind was moving the other way too, in the opposite direction around the wheel. And sometime we would have to meet, Liam said. Now I greet you, brothers, and I am sad because I know what this means. We are alone, Hautamaki said, looking at the massed trillions of stars. We have closed the circle and found only ourselves. The galaxy is ours, but we are alone. He turned about, not realizing that Liam, the golden alien, the man, had turned at the same time in the same manner. They faced outwards, looking at the infinite depth and infinite blackness of intergalactic space, empty of stars. Dimly, distantly, there were spots of light, microscopic blurs against the darkness, not stars, but island universes, like the one at whose perimeter they stood. These two beings were different in many ways. In the air they breathed, the color of their skins, their languages, mannerisms, cultures. They were as different as the day is from the night. The flexible fabric of mankind had been warped by the countless centuries until they could no longer recognize each other. But time, distance, and mutation could not change one thing. They were still men, still human. It is certain, then, Hautamaki said. We are alone in the galaxy. Alone in this galaxy. They looked at each other, then glanced away. At that moment, they measured their humanness against the same rule and were equal. For they had turned at the same instant and looked outward into intergalactic space, towards the infinitely remote light that was another island galaxy. "It will be difficult to get there," someone said. They had lost a battle. There was no defeat.